Welcome to Sundays with Jane Eyre. This is episode 3. You Are a Strange Child, Miss Jane, covering chapters 3 and 4 of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, and joining me today as co-host is Dr. Kathleen Hudson. Kathleen.
Very nice to see you. Hello.
Welcome. Thanks for being here today. Y'all caught up and watched the last shows?
All caught up. All caught up. Really enjoyed all the last shows too. Have so much to say.
I know.
So much to talk about.
And we fit it all in just an hour and a half. How about
amazing?
That? Yeah. So, well, welcome to all of you out there, all our erudite Brontosaurs and airheads. If you're new to the show, just a note on our format. If you're watching live on Zoom, the chat is for you to talk to each other. Do it. And it always fills up and it's a lot of fun. And I can't keep track of it because it's so busy and while we're talking. But if you have a question for Kathleen or me, put it in the Q&A box on your Zoom interface, and we will do our best to hit as many of the questions as possible today, hopefully all of them. We're also streaming live on YouTube, everyone. I encourage everyone to like and subscribe on the YouTube channel and leave a comment. Liking, subscribing, comments, even on past episodes, they all help us gain greater visibility and grow your audience. So please do that. Our co-host today, Dr. Kathleen Hudson, everyone, earned her postgraduate degree from the University of Sheffield. We know plenty of Sheffield people on our Sundays programs. She is the author of Servants and the Gothic, 1764 to 1831, a half-told tale, and editor of the edited collection Women's Authorship and the Early Gothic Legacies and Innovations. She currently works as an adjunct professor at United States Naval Academy and Anne Arundel Community College. Got that pronunciation right?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Well done.
I said Arundel earlier, and she's like Arundel, and I'm like, Arundel. It's a accent. So,
it could go either way, to be fair. So
I'm happy to have you here today, Kathleen.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm very excited for this.
And you you did University of Sheffield. I mean, the Ghoul Guides, Mary and Lauren, yes, who are here frequently, went there. And when you were there, I know you have your book, and we'll talk about your book and how you did that. But what got you to go over to Sheffield and into that program?
Just really did want to. So I did my undergraduate work at the University of Scranton, and in Pennsylvania. So your neck of the woods. And I knew I wanted to do a postgrad degree, and I knew I wanted to travel. And I was very much drawn to England a lot because I did love books like Jane Eyre as a kid. And I was like, the moors, the heaths, the lanes, the country houses. So when given the opportunity to go over there, I definitely want to jump on that thing. And ending up in Sheffield was a little bit of an accident. It was just a program that I really liked, and I got accepted too. And I had only gone over to get my master's, but then I stayed and did the PhD. So, and I met Lauren and Mary there as well. So
yeah. And were you interested in Gothic just on your own reading, or was that something that developed in school?
It's one of those things. I always enjoyed horror, and I always enjoyed horror movies and also horror stories. And I did enjoy romance, big R romance novels like the Brontes. So I think I was sort of primed for the Gothic when I went over to do my postgrad work, but I had not settled on that as a area. I really didn't know that you could do that. I was like, you mean you have an entire course that's nothing but Gothic literature? This is amazing to me. So it was one of those things where I'm like, you mean I could just watch horror movies all day and that's work? That's me, doing work, productive work. It was one of those things we all took as part of the master's program, the Rise of the Gothic class, and just I fell in love with it pretty much immediately, and it was just like I definitely want to work in that kind of literature and servants.
And then your work there, led you into looking at servants in these Gothic tales. And then how did that come about? And tell us some about your book.
Well, I always say, and it's true, that I kind of got into servants because I didn't like them at first. Because you read stuff like The Mysteries of Udolpho, or even something like Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights. And the servants are always they always interrupt. Stuff is happening, and then the servant runs in and kind of slows everything down. So, when you're reading Mysteries of Udolpho, you're just like, I just want to know what's behind the veiled portrait. Like, stop, Annette, stop talking. Get me to the interesting part.
Did you see this? Somebody, I just have to say in the chat, Adam in the chat, when I want to read about servants in the Gothic just because I hate the depiction of servants and classism in virtually every 18th, 19th century novel. So,
yes.
maybe for different reasons, but there you
go. but that was it. It was one of those things where I'm like, why do you keep like bursting your own bubble here? I was so tense. Like, I'm ratcheting up this tension, and then you have this other character come in and basically be ridiculous. And then I went back and reread it, and I'm like, oh, actually, they're not ridiculous. They are really, really important. They are contributing a great deal to the heroine's unpacking of the larger Gothic mysteries. In some cases, they're the only living text that provides any kind of background for what's actually going on. All the mysteries, they're the ones who know. And they come in and they are caretakers. They are meant to, they sort of keep everyone alive. Everyone who long ago would have passed out from sheer hunger and fatigue because no one reminded them to eat because they were too busy being Gothic heroines. That they were, and yes, that they did fit. Yes, people don't like their depictions, but that they do fit into a hierarchy, a structure. The middle-class heroine can't have her happy ending unless a servant basically approves of her new position and is like, okay, yeah, now I'm going to work in your domestic space because your domestic space is the right kind of domestic space. And it was just one of those things where I'm like, wow, you really can't have, these books without servant characters. And that is a figure who by rights should be silent, by rights should be marginalized, should have almost nothing to say in the larger narrative, which is about aristocratic.
Yeah, because I find that often in books that are not Gothic, I find that the servants are invisible.
Yeah.
Unless it's about them, like Richardson's Pamela or something like that, where it's like about a servant, they're there. But usually, they're barely recognized.
It's but
in Gothic
at the same time, even when they're silent, though, even when they're not recognized and they're silent, it's just the fact that they're there. It's you live in a house, but downstairs is a whole different group of people who, yes, functions invisibly, but the food's served, the house is cleaned. And there was some adaptation, I think it was what was it? I can't remember what the original text was, but how they did it was every time the married couple was having an argument, and every time they went into a new room, they had to stop the argument because the servant had to leave because they didn't want to do it in front of the servant. So I do think too, there is that awareness that there's another person here and they are going to gossip about you necessarily. And, you don't get to have secrets if you have servants because they're there, they're making judgments. And interestingly, in the Gothic, most of the servant judgments are very sound. They are based on a very important moral understanding and also a practical sense of the economics of hierarchy and status. So they do become very important people in the text. Yeah, for sure.
And is it maybe also the fact that Gothic novels frequently are about secrets? So
yes,
they come into play more.
And it's amazing too, because Gothic novels are about secrets and also about inherited secrets. And one of the things that you inherit in addition to the house are the servants who come with it. So Clara Reeve's Old English Baron, there is literally a servant who basically functions as a document. It is his return that makes every, kind of inherited, misplaced thing fit again. And yes, that they are that this is about secrets. So on one hand, servants are perpetuating secrets, and on another hand, they also enable the heroine to really negotiate those in a healthy and safe way, because they're also looking after the heroine, which is pretty important.
Well, we'll get to a little bit of that today because we've got Bessie today.
Good old Bessie.
Strong. I've got things to say about Bessie too. I've been talking about it ever since. There was a lot of chat about it last week, and
Yes.
I said something like, "But Bessie's good," and everybody was like, "What?" And I've been talking to my wife all week, and I'm like, "Well, maybe Bessie's not so good." Like I think I had almost this nostalgic memory view like Jane has about Bessie, but then when you look at her, maybe not.
I think she pulls some stuff together, and she is a very formative character.
We'll go through her today, definitely.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but your Jane Eyre story, how did you? What's your Jane
Eyre story? Well, I feel like my Jane Eyre story is probably similar to a lot of people's Jane Eyre stories, which is I read it on the youngish side. So I think I was about 12. So I brought my copy of Jane Eyre, which is not. Everyone brought these great editions of like Oxford and who did it. This is a Reader's Digest.
And it's edition, fancy,
which is really fancy. So this was one of those books that I had read young adult. I was a big reader as a kid. I had read. In fact, it was one of those things where if it was my birthday or Christmas or something, and someone was giving me a book for a present, they had to give it to me last because I would just stop whatever I was doing and start reading it. Yeah. But this was one of those books where I'm like, this is an adult book. This is a grown-up book, and it does have these like really gorgeous illustrations and everything in that. But I read it when I was 12, and there was a lot of stuff about it I didn't get.
Show us one. You were opening up.
Let me see if I can find. Yes, I've teased the illustrations and then I didn't show anyone. Hang on. Well, here's one that's
look at that.
Them in the they've got these really gorgeous black and white.
They charcoals maybe.
Yeah. And just really, it was. And yeah, that's Bertha, terrifying Bertha. So that no way was a terrifying thing when I was 12. But yes, it was. So I read it. Yeah, I think about when I was 12, and it was a grown-up book, and it was fancy, and it had the ribbon in it and everything. And also, just the minute I started reading it, I absolutely fell in love with it, and it was. I thought it was very romantic the first time I read it, and then I reread it as a high school, and I was like, this isn't romantic, this is awful. And then I reread it again as an adult, and I'm like, it is kind of romantic. But also it was just one of those things where I fell in love with Jane instantly. Mm-hmm. It was I was like, oh, that's me. That's a character I can connect to, that she is so righteous and flawed and confused a lot of the time and trying her best, and just this warrior for the truth, and that she was kind of everything I would aspire to be in a heroine. And it's interesting because having studied sort of earlier Gothic things, they don't necessarily have heroines that are that flawed. The heroines are with notable exceptions, a little bit more two-dimensional. They almost don't speak because they're so afraid of saying the wrong or improper thing. But that Jane just in the first couple chapters tears a new one for every adult in her life because they're wrong. And just that I think it just captures so well that frustration you feel as a child that no one listens to you necessarily, or as an adult, that you know what's right, and people are trying to trample over you in one way or another. And it just sort of captured my complete imagination. And the setting too captured my imagination. I fell in love with this idea of heaths and moors and haunted houses, and it was just so great. So it was one of my first real adult reads, and it did just, I think it stayed with me for so long. And actually, when I started to do the PhD, originally it was going to start with Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, and I had to cut that because I had to sort of narrow down my focus a little bit. But it was those books that were so foundational to everything I studied after, everything I was really interested in after.
Yeah, your book looks at servants in the era, the kind of heyday Gothic era.
Yes, yeah.
And Jane Eyre, everybody remembers, is after. This is I mean, if you honestly, if you really think the heyday, the height of Gothic is 1790s and the early 1800s, this is 40 years later that she's writing this. So. And
yet is still so, I think, linked to those early Gothic texts, like takes just takes the entire blueprint and then does something completely new with it and really expands it in such interesting ways. Yeah.
Well, we'll see some of those Gothic elements today too when we look at the book. That's really, but I hear this a lot, and I completely agree with this too. This kind of, I think you said something like, and you identified with Jane so much, and people, identify with characters in books, and I'm finding that a younger generation of readers coming up now almost needs that identification in books more so than I think my generation or previously, or it is only because I'm this kind of privileged white male position, and almost all the books I read were white male characters anyway, and so I automatically identified with them. And so I only saw their differences with me, you know what I mean? Because I was already kind of this group. But I don't know. It's a, as you can see, it's like a complicated idea that I've been trying to work out lately. And are books windows or mirrors? I mean, they can be both, obviously, but.
Well, I think it is tricky too, because you have characters who are very clearly meant to be, you fill in the gaps of who they are. And Jane really isn't. Jane is very, very much her own person. So it does strike me that, a lot of people do still identify with her in a way that they don't necessarily identify with, again, maybe earlier Gothic heroines who are basically almost like walking conduct novels. It's like, this is exactly what you should be doing at the right time, all the time. And there's not a whole lot of like individualized personality. One heroine is sometimes very interchangeable with another. And to depart from that and then have a very, I think, distinctive character who is not perfect in any sense of the word, and who changes radically and who struggles very much with changes over the course of the novel. And then to have so many people, identify with her and be like, that's it. That's me.
That's me. I hear that so
the
much.
Flawed one. That's me.
Well, that's good. Hey, we're all flawed. We should recognize that. So wonderful. Well, let's get to the book, shall we?
Right. Yes.
We are at, last week we did chapters 1 and 2, and chapter 2 ended with Jane thrust back into the Red Room, and then she loses consciousness, as happens so
heartbreaking.
Often. And as happens so often in Gothic novels too. I mean, it's usually the older, woman heroine fainting, and here it's even the child.
It's all about locking up women, and I think this was pointed out last week too. She's the mad woman in the attic at this point. She is the classic, the mad girl, the mad cat. Mad cat. Yeah, she is the classic Gothic heroine being imprisoned. Very much so. Yeah.
So remind everybody on Zoom, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and we will get to those today. If you're watching on YouTube right now, if you put a question in the live chat, I will get to it after the show when I see them, and if you or anything like that. So you can do that as well. So chapter 2 ended at chapter 3. Chapter 3 starts off, the next thing I remember is waking up with a feeling as if I had a frightful nightmare and seeing before me a terrible red glare crossed with thick black bars. I mean, talking about, captivity, image. I mean, it's like she's in prison, and the red glare, which, she remembers the red from the Red Room, and then voices speaking. I love this, as voices speaking with a hollow sound as if muffled by a rush of wind or water. There's something biblical there, isn't there?
She's really capturing, I think, very much, again, the kind of notion of terror. I throughout these 2 chapters, I was like, oh gosh, she's really emerging as a Gothic author in this, is Jane. Like, she's really learning how to write like a Gothic author here. But yeah, she really is tapping into that whole terror versus horror, Radcliffean. This is what makes terror terrifying. And it's the confused.
And she says it's an all predominating sense of terror.
Yes, and just the confusion and the not quite being able to see it, and the obscurity of it is very classic like Gothic literary theory from decades earlier. But she also has this. She's been raised up and supported more tenderly than I had ever been raised or upheld before. She has a soothing conviction of protection and security.
when I knew that there was a stranger in the room. Like somebody not belonging to Gateshead.
Yeah, there's absolutely no way it's this person then.
Was relieving to her. She's soothed by the fact that it's not someone, and it's Mr. Lloyd, the apothecary.
Who I do like very much.
Yeah, and well,
he is just this figure out of. Yeah.
Is this his only scene that we get coming up? Like, you know?
I think pretty much.
I don't think he comes in again, but people do remember him and like him, I guess, because he's the only character that comes in, and it's really nice to Jane.
Well, and also I think he does talk to her like an adult for someone who has pointedly not been able to have a conversation with anybody where she isn't immediately shut down. Mr. Lloyd asks her questions. He responds to her answers in a very thoughtful way. And it is almost like, again, this is the first time, I think she says a little bit later that, she doesn't really know how to say what she's feeling, but she's learning how to do it. She senses that's very important that she like have some self-expression in that moment. Yeah, I do think that then does kind of prime her for later.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I mean, first though, it's, I felt so sheltered and befriended while he sat in the chair near my pillow.
This lovely, lovely friend person.
And then, but then the room darkens and sadness wears her down again, and it's Bessie there. And I really want to make sure I notice the Bessie things today too. And she doesn't even, Bessie asked her how she slept, and she says, "Scarcely dared I answer, for I feared the next sentence might be rough." So I think. I think it's good to point out things that I had, wasn't really remembering about Bessie was that, Bessie is not nice to Jane as well, or has not been nice to Jane up to this point in her life as the others. Now, she's not as bad as Abbott, and Jane even mentions that a little earlier. She's not obnoxious as Abbott, but she still fears the kind of rough treatment she'll get from Bessie.
I would argue that Bessie is kind of the only mother figure in this pre-Lowood, because Aunt Reed isn't really around enough to be. I mean, Aunt Reed is bad mother, but the only instances really where that she's cared for is Bessie. And I also, and again, I'm sure we'll get to this because we're not quite there yet, but I loved last week when you guys were talking about that Bessie is a storyteller. She's stealing stuff from Pamela and Henry Earl of Moreland and all these fairy tales, and basically rewriting them and passing them off as her own stuff. I do think it's interesting and important that, again, Jane is really emerging as a narrator of her own tales and as a semi-Gothic author in these chapters, and where she gets her background in storytelling is from Bessie. Bessie's the one who tells her ghost stories and Gothic stories and fairy tales. And there is that intersection a little bit with Bewick's History of Birds, that it's just she gives her the kind of stuff that Jane's imagination latches onto, and she can sort of go back to that a bit. I mean, I think even chapters later, like well into the middle of the book, when it's time for her to go back because Miss Reed is dying, she remembers things that Bessie used to say about, when you dream of somebody, then that's a sign of the death. So I do think, yes, she's seeing her through a sentimental lens backwards, but that, I don't know if you can underestimate that. One, Bessie is sort of her primary source of care, so she does function as a mother figure, and two, that care very much intersects with this practice of storytelling, which Jane then kind of picks up a little bit.
The impression I get too is that Bessie is harsh with her at times and tries to keep her in her place, but not to the abusive level that happens with the Reeds, or maybe even with the other servant Abbott. And at this point now, it seems as if this episode with Jane being locked in the Red Room and passing out and being so frightened over it is a turning point for Bessie too, and how she sees and treats Jane. And now she's, speaking nicely to her, and Jane's response is wonder civility this. And she's surprised that Bessie's, being more caring for her than she has been in the past. But it is a fact, like, well, it is something that happens here. Bessie is seeming to be is caring for
Yeah.
her more, and Jane is noticing it.
I mean, it is almost a sentimental evolution, I would think, a little bit, because she witnesses suffering, she feels empathy, so she changes a little bit as a character. Bessie does go through her own kind of sentimental awakening of, the child is suffering, so you got to readjust that approach.
Well, now Jane goes and she overhears Bessie and one of the other servants talking. And we get all this supernatural, spooky talk from them. Bessie wants Sarah to come and sleep with her in the nursery. She doesn't want to be alone with her because she might die. First of all, that the death is hovering here.
Yeah. And again, that thing that you guys were talking about in the last episode about how it's Jane potentially haunting the text, that she is potentially the start of a whole new ghost story for Bessie.
From years from now, that this was the story that will be told when the young orphan was in the red room, and here's her story. Something passed her, all dressed in white, and vanished. A great black dog behind him.
Yes, yeah, and then it spirals off into more storytelling, more storytelling exchanges.
3 loud raps on the chamber door, light in the churchyard just over his grave. I mean, the story is really I love the black dog story too, which is very prevalent in on the moors and in northern England, and these supernatural dog inspired Conan Doyle to write the Hound of the Baskervilles. And even that like there was the poor black dog. Like, what are you bringing that story?
None of that happened. Yeah. Well, and again, it is just fascinating. I do feel like Bronte is making a conscious commentary, very much about a very genre literate commentary for that, because she's taking a figure that is so prevalent in Gothic literature. Like, you can't have a Gothic novel without some servants telling ghost stories, and really, expanding on that of, you're in the ghost story, and this Gothic author is now adding, the big black dog and a light above the grave and 3 loud raps on the chamber door and all the other stuff. So that, it is gothicizing Jane and everything around it, and that Bessie is almost functioning as a author within the text, running off into her own kind of, very scary version of what actually happened. But it is interesting too, I think, because I would make the argument that in gothicizing things, servants are doing that to contextualize suffering and trauma, and in a sense legitimizing suffering and trauma. So by making it, by sort of legitimizing the idea of it a haunting, and that this was a real experience, because look, there was a big black dog and there was a grave involved and an actual ghost and yada yada, that it does put Jane's suffering into a kind of, and grief into a kind of context that is then, sort of palatable a little bit.
Jane comments, such dread as only children can, as children only can feel, which is very much a retrospective line from Jane as an adult narrator thinking about what is going on here. But then this, that she talks about, her nerves had a shock, which I feel the reverberation to this day. So let me get pulled out of the text a little bit, and now we're definitely looking in on Jane with the narrator, and this forgiveness for Mrs. Reed. To you I owe some fearful pangs of mental suffering, but I ought to forgive you, for you knew not what you did. While rending my heartstrings, you thought you were only uprooting my bad propensities.
It's one of those tragic, and I think that was one of the things that, again, you have to connect with Jane on some level because of this thing, which is, all the things that make her her, and like all her emotional truths she is then told are wrong. And that's throughout the text. Like that's from here to St. John Rivers, is that what you're feeling? That's wrong. Even though, it's you were rending my heartstrings, but you were only uprooting my bad propensities. That emotional truth and emotional expression is labeled as wrong, I think is really interesting in that kind of thing.
I think she's also given Mrs. Reed far more credit than she deserves. So,
Yeah.
I
I was
mean,
never so annoyed as when, as a younger reader, when she forgives
don't forgive
Mrs.
her.
Reed. I'm like, she's on her deathbed now. Where's the pillow? Now's your chance. Yeah.
That will come
In
later,
some
people. We'll
ways,
get
Jane
that
is a
scene
little bit,
later.
yeah, yeah.
So,
In some ways, Jane is, yeah. Again, she grows significantly from that.
well, it'll be
But
something that we'll really get to look at later. Long down the road in this
mhm,
novel is Jane in the end. And looking at this whole story as her looking back on everything and how she feels about it in the future. And it's almost that she needs to forgive her as an adult looking back on the story more
yeah,
than at the time, because, well, obviously she's not ready to forgive her at the time because
no,
Jane will have some things to say to her.
yes, yes,
um
and also too that Reed never accepts any kind of forgiveness from her. That it does become something that is almost 110% contained in Jane. That she forgives her. It has no effect on anyone around her, but that's just something she has to do for her own head, I guess.
well, at this point still, she's Bessie's in the kitchen, and then she brings her this brightly painted china plate with a bird of paradise nestling in
Yeah.
a wreath of convolvuli and rosebuds. I don't know what convolvuli is. I didn't look
This
it
is
up.
another thing that, again, as a kid, I was just like, that sounds amazing. I don't know what that means, but it sounds
Yeah.
amazing.
And it's another bird image in here. And we get these
Yes.
birds, and we'll have another bird, coming up soon. And it is, the bird imagery is strong in this novel. This image of animals that can fly and are free, but you can also capture them. But this time, even getting this plate and this cake, it doesn't help her. She asks if she could have a book, and she asks for Gulliver's Travels, which I love that she asked for Gulliver. But before we get to that, she has this wonderful, explanation of why she likes Gulliver more than kind of fairy tales. And it's the like elves and fairy tales. For as to the elves, having sought them in vain among foxglove leaves and bells, under mushrooms and beneath the ground ivy mantling old wall nooks, I had at length made up my mind to the sad truth that they were all gone out of England to some savage country where the woods were wilder and thicker and the population more scant. There's something really tragic in that line.
Yeah.
That
Well, yeah, and her
realization.
considering a narrative of facts, which is that there is no magical anything where she is, and that you have to travel the wide world to do that.
It is interesting though that that's what it is. That it's tragic in the sense that magic has gone out of my world, but she really does only look at it as the world that's the very actual world that she's in, that she can see from her house and that she lives in. That it is out there somewhere, and then she sees it in a book like Gulliver's Travels, where Gulliver goes to lands where there's miniature people and giant people and obviously in horses too, and then up in the cloud, what's the Laputa, the land up in the clouds. So because that's a voyage, that seems I love this child's logic, like that's because he took a voyage, of course, then that's where you could go. And
I think that's why too she seems so unwilling to accept ideas of hell and heaven later at Lowood. She just, again, she's looking at this as a narrative of facts. And she does have a brilliant imagination, but that just doesn't make sense to her. So she's sort of like, where is that physically? Like, tell me on a map where that is. And her sort of disbelief that it could be close, that it could be, something she could get to. I do think, it's an interesting kind of mental path she goes down there.
And but still, she's at a point where there's some transition going on with her. That I mentioned, Bessie has changed. Jane has certainly changed, and this is why the novel begins when it does.
Yeah,
as
this is a growth moment.
Yeah, and if Jane Eyre, the adult, is thinking of starting her story, she starts it here for a reason. She doesn't start it when she's 6, because apparently these things weren't going on then. This is all kind of happening now, and this is the moment where Jane is making realizations about the world and her place in it and who she is. And this, not even this book helps her, and not even
Yeah.
Gulliver helps her, and she puts it on the table beside the untasted tart. That's very sad.
It's a very sad. I always feel very bad for untasted tarts.
Yes,
that's the rejected food is always
as
very
sad
very
as I am. That tart's always getting tasted. I'm sorry,
Yep.
I'm just gonna eat it anyway.
It's gonna get tasted more if it's if I'm sad. To be
I'll
honest,
enjoy it more if I'm happy.
Give me an entire Ben and Jerry's. That's
there you go. Bessie starts singing, and she first starts singing a song in the days when we went gypsying a long time ago, and which is a song from Notes and Books. I mean, it's an Edward Ransford song from 1838. And I've looked at the whole song. It's not that good. I'm glad we only get a couple lines in it because what she gives us instead then is this song that Betsy sings,
devastating song,
the Poor Orphan Child, which is a Charlotte Bronte poem, and she'll do this later, and the Brontes love to do this, stick their poems in their text and act as if, and Charlotte does, especially in her first novel, The Professor, where she's written poems and she has her characters speaking them. But this one is not only especially tied to this text about the poor orphan child, and so Jane identifies, it's a really gorgeous ballad. And someone, Adam, had shared on our Facebook group, just a contemporary group doing a version of it, and I looked online. There's lots of people do versions of it, and it sounds very much like one of these great kind of almost Appalachian ballads with people playing along with it and singing, because it's got that same structure that is still used today. But
I was going to say, it's one of those ones, sometimes they're a bit clunky, but you can almost hear this one when you read it.
Read that first stanza.
So my feet, they are sore, and my limbs, they are weary. Long is the way, and the mountains are wild. Soon will the twilight close moonless and dreary over the path of the poor orphan child.
And it's really good. It's really strong.
It is.
And that even should I fall verse next to last. Read that.
Even should I fall over the broken bridge passing, or stray in the marshes by false lights beguiling, still will my father with promise and blessing take to his bosom the poor orphan child. It's and again, it's really genre literate. It's referencing loads of, again, fairy tales and mythology, which is great.
And things that happen later. I mean, this is kind of, almost, this is what will happen with Jane later when she, leave and she's out wandering later, an adult. This kind of experience happens to her, but she's clearly the poor orphan child. And also, not only does it prefigure her experiences later, but it's kind of the song she needs to hear right now, that because it's a song of spiritual comfort. It's a song that, yes, you're a poor orphan child and left alone and untended, all that, but God will come and take care of you. But the real melancholy is at the very end. It's like, and like, even if I die,
heaven is home, and a rest will not fail me. And it is the height, I think, of, again, the sort of sensibility and sentimental heroine that she has such an amazing emotional response to that. She listens and she feels, and especially, I mean, she was at such a horrifying extreme in the Red Room in terms of terror and being rendered insensible and being rendered in prison. So to very soon after then have this emotional catharsis and release is amazing. And then pretty much follows with, again, Mr. Lloyd coming in and basically trying to help her articulate some of those emotions,
where she will get some kind of comfort and help from somebody. Adam had asked a question, it sent me a question about this, like, is it a Bronte poem? And it is, but it's only we only know it's a Bronte poem because no one can find evidence of it anywhere else. Like, there's no manuscript that exists of it in her papers, and it wasn't in the poems that she put together with her sisters that was published. And I'm thinking maybe it came up afterwards because it's so strong. I'd be surprised if it wasn't included in that. Maybe she only came up with it in in writing this novel.
Mhm.
But yeah, it looks like it's definitely a Charlotte Bronte poem,
Charlotte Bronte original.
and one of her best.
Yes. Yeah.
So Dr. Lloyd comes back in, and
makes Bessie leave.
yes.
Bessie's still trying to, I think, manage the narrative here. But he's not having it, which again, I do kind of love, is that Bessie is still trying to control everything in their place. And he's just like, no, go, be gone.
Yeah, she says, I mean, she's even crying, and then she's crying, and she answers, I never cried for any such thing in my life. I hate going out in the carriage. I cry because I'm miserable. Oh, because Bessie thinks she's crying because she can't go out. She's like, that's like, and I love her giving her, she's like, I'm telling you the truth here.
Yes. And also don't dismiss me as being a child who has not gotten something that she wants. It's not that. And you can't impose child values onto me. This is what it is, which is I'm miserable and I'm being made miserable.
Yeah. And Lloyd recognizes right away that, she's not going to be as honest with Bessie in the room. So, so he sends her out. And I love Jane's thought here about, how much about how hard it is for her to tell the truth, in a sense, about how she really feels. Read the beginning of the first sentence of that paragraph. See that, how much I wish to reply. Do you have that handy?
Oh, yes. Yeah. How much I wish to reply fully to this question. How difficult it was to frame any answer. Children can feel, but they cannot analyze their feelings. And if the analysis is partially affected in thought, they know not how to express the result of the process in words. Fearful, however, of losing this first and only opportunity of relieving my grief by imparting it, I, after disturbed pause, contrived to frame a meager, though as far as it went, true response. Now, and I do like her true response is, I have no father or mother, brothers or sisters, is that she's alone. And isolation is something that is so, I think, again, crucial to Jane throughout. Like that's something she needs to be around people. She's often, I think, depicted as this very shy, sheltered person, but she blossoms when she's with people. And to sort of almost recognize that now is important.
Yeah, she's not alone because she's choosing that. She's alone because she's forced to be alone. Because who's she going to play with? Georgiana and Elizabeth? Like, they're terrible. So,
but no, I think I remember reading that as a younger reader and just being like, yeah, that's right, isn't it? Like, you feel all these things so much all the time, but you can't articulate them, and that is that process of going from childhood to
although
adulthood.
That paragraph is very much a retrospect. Like, this is the adult explaining, why I had a hard time answering questions. Jane her at 10 certainly isn't thinking about the analysis partially affected in thought.
The object, the subject.
But yeah, right away it's I have no father or mother, brothers or sisters, and then she's just telling him what happened. Like, John Reed knocked me down. And
basically this rhetorical question and answer thing, which enables her to start articulating it. And again, I just think it's a massive growth moment for her, that she's like, oh, yeah, okay, now I can say it.
And the difference between with this Q&A that will happen now and then the Q&A that will happen with Brocklehurst in the next chapter.
Where he's telling her what she's thinking.
And Lloyd is asking her questions here, about, and this, would you like to go and live with other, she says Aunt Reed said there was some poor low relations called Eyre, but she knew nothing about them. And she's like, you to go with them. And I love this. I reflected, poverty looks grim to grown people. Still more so to children. They have not much idea of industrious, working, respectable poverty. They think of the word only as connected with ragged clothes, scanty food, fireless grates, rude manners, and debasing vices. Poverty for me was synonymous with degradation. No, I should not like to belong to poor people, was my reply. A very honest response.
And sensible.
And well, especially with the explanation from the narrator saying, like, this is, of course you wouldn't want to be, because the way poverty has been portrayed to you is something that, like, I don't want any parts of that. And then she even says, I was not heroic enough to to purchase liberty at the price of caste. Ooh, what an interesting word to use.
Caste, yes. Yes, it is. Especially since at this point she could kind of be said to have no caste. Like she functions, I mean, has been pointed out by other servants, as not even a servant.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't fit at all in any kind of hierarchy. And yet throughout the story, she is, I think, recognized frequently as a gentlewoman of some kind, you know, that she does have that kind, like when she finds the River family, they say, okay, well, she's obviously not a poor person. Yeah. She's a rich poor person who's in reduced circumstances, because she has that gentility to her. But it is interesting.
As a governess,
yes.
she will still have the same issue. I mean, the position of the governess is
she's not a servant, she's not a family member,
but not, you know, family. And so they wind up, even though governesses were frequently from families, you know, of gentlemen, like their fathers didn't work for a living, they just didn't have enough money and they wound up being governesses. So
caste is interesting, especially with the kind of undercurrent racial and class issues that's throughout the book. Again, we never did quite establish whether Bronte is a conservative author who accidentally wrote a radical text or a, you know, secret radical or what.
That's good. I want to talk about that then if you want at some point. But right now I'm going to take a little mid break, everyone, and bring you a couple messages here. First is that we bring you Sundays with Jane Eyre for free. So if you would like to support the Rosenbach through donation, you can do so at our website. Since this novel was published in 1847, we're asking for donations of $18.47 to support the show. Starting next week, I'll start giving shout outs to those who have donated to keep this show going. But you can also become a member. Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some programs, plus 10% off of any reading courses and 50% off of any Rosenbach programs. We have some great programs and courses coming up, which you can see at our website. There's a couple of Ulysses courses starting. There's a Soulful Foodways courses starting. And there's other programs as well. We also have a brand new Sundays with Jane Eyre merchandise, mugs, t-shirts, and stickers featuring our fantastic logo, which was created by Anu Heyu Ramsey, which I really love, and I'm really happy we have that this year. So if you guys want to buy some Sundays with Jane Eyre merch, it's up on our website, and you can do that. And I thank you, and that all that helps support this show and helps support what we do at the Rosenbach, helps us care for our collections, helps us create more of this great programming to bring to you. And I also want to remind everyone that we have an official bookseller for Sundays with Jane Eyre. A novel idea on Passyunk is a community-minded bookstore and an event space in East Passyunk, which is in South Philly, if you're not familiar with the Philly area. It was established in 2018. It is endeavored to be an inclusive space that promotes art and literature with a focus on supporting local artists, artisans, and educators. If you live in the Philadelphia area, stop in and check them out. What reader doesn't love discovering a new bookstore? But you can visit them online as well, and they have a few editions of Jane Eyre in stock, including a cool manga version, brand new. And you can also order any of the books we mentioned on our website, on our program through their website. So thanks so much to Novel Idea for partnering with us for Sundays with Jane Eyre. Back to the show. So Lloyd's still with her, and then he mentions about school. Hey, would you like to go back to school? Or would you like to go to school? And Jane's like, I don't even know what school is. Like, I've heard stories about it. And she's heard punishment stories.
Interestingly, again, Bessie once again informs taste and preference, and so does John Reed, because they have no positive things to say about school, but she's kind of like, well, if John Reed hates it, then I can probably, that's good.
Maybe it's okay.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing for her is that it would be a complete change. It implied a long journey, an entire separation from Gateshead, an entrance into a new life, that she'd be Gulliver. School means I get to be Gulliver. So yeah, I think I'd be interested in that.
Yeah. And that she really is kind of almost seems to be in severe physical danger where she is. You know, I saw in one of the chats, someone had said, I can't get over, it still strikes me that the child abuse early on in the book. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And it is in some ways presented as a matter of course, but she is in a lot of danger all the time. Yeah.
The apothecary ventured to recommend my being sent to school. The recommendation was no doubt readily enough adopted. Lloyd's an apothecary, and another hint at the treatment of Jane in this house is that she mentions that the children get to see a physician, but they just bring the apothecary in for servants and Jane. But that's not actually a bad thing at this time. Apothecaries were, practical physicians, that they did the work and understood the medicine. And I mean, it's certainly by the time this novel is written, the apothecary trade has been very much, reformed, and they needed, medical degrees, and they needed to practice and do all this stuff to accomplish it. But out in the countryside here, it's still you'd probably be better off being seen by the apothecary than the physician.
And since he's almost functioning as a proto-psychiatrist at this point, it's works especially well. I also like to think that since Miss Reed is most afraid of Jane spilling her guts to outside people and just bringing her reputation down, I would like to think that Mr. Lloyd then left and told everybody about this poor kid he met, at the Reed house. So,
well, she finally hears her story, and this is the moment. I mean, imagine she's 10 years old. Yeah. She doesn't really know anything about her parents or her background.
And again, she's overhearing it from servants. Yeah. It's not even like someone sat her down and told her.
Do you want to read that little paragraph?
Yes. Let me just find.
On that same occasion?
Yes. On that same occasion, I learned for the first time from Miss Abbott's communications to Bessie that my father had been a poor clergyman, that my mother had married him against the wishes of her friends who considered the match beneath her, that my grandfather Reed was so irritated at her disobedience, he cut her off without a shilling, that after my mother and father had been married a year, the latter caught the typhus fever while visiting amongst the poor of a large manufacturing town where his curacy was situated, and where that disease was then prevalent, that my mother took the infection from him and both died within a month of each other.
There's a novel. There's a novel right there.
I was going to say that's the heroine backstory right there, right from the off. And I also do find it, Bessie, when she heard this narrative, sighed and said, "Poor Miss Jane is to be pitied too, Abbott." Again, it's that you witness suffering and you hear suffering and you have this sentimental, emotional reaction. Is I think not saying that Bessie's great, but it is a redemptive moment.
It is. This is Bessie's changing as well right now, we learn. And this is why I think that Jane does remember her fondly in the future, because at the formative moment in her life, when Jane herself learned a lot about herself and went through this big change, Bessie did as well. And she was with her and she was kind to her during that change. And this is, this does everything for a relation. And I'm certain I would think fondly of somebody of that, that seems very normal to me, that you would not remember like they corrected you or were harsh to you before then.
Especially when everyone else is also being awful to you.
Yeah, because they continue to be awful. Including Abbott here, who cannot care for such a little toad as that.
Yeah. Because purely because of looks, really. If she were a nice, pretty child, one might be compassionate for Lord.
And Bessie enforces that. She understands that. But here, and now here's something that I want to talk to you about, is that Bessie's position in the family, where she might have some sympathy with Jane now, is that she still needs to support this kind of system that she is a part of as a servant, that like the master family are beautiful and above me, and we need to recognize that, and we all have our place, including Jane.
And it's again, as we said, Jane doesn't fit anywhere. Like, I think a lot of this is they don't know what to do with her.
You are a strange child, Miss Jane.
Yes,
we'll hit that later.
Yeah, when Mrs. Reed has basically rejected any possibility of considering her as a child within this structure. So what is she? And if she's not a child and she's not a servant, and again, I do think a lot of this comes down to the performance of childhood. We're coming into that weird Victorian paradox thing where they elevate this idea of the child and this angelic, perfect child, and oh, isn't that lovely? But at the same time, you're sending all these children to workhouses, and you sort of have the emergence of these economies that just chew children up and spit them out, and massive child death, and that's just something that we all kind of accept in a Victorian mindset. But that she's not performing childhood right. She doesn't look cute. She doesn't have the curls. She's too smart. She is not accepted within the family as a child. So what is she? I do think a lot of it does come down to Bessie just being like, well, I don't know what to do with this. I can't fit you in any kind of anything. And yes, that they do dote so much on the other children, as if that is expected, because those are ideal children. Those are rich people's children. Those are, they fit into a kind of performance. So we have to support that. And that's part of the hierarchy. And I'm seeing a couple things in the chat that Bessie is kind of a follower, being forced to conform to a certain thing. And I do think that's accurate. I mean, what can Bessie do really?
And even her job has a time limit. She's the nursery maid. She's in charge of the children.
Yes.
And they're going to grow up in no time at all. And then, we'll see later what does happen to Bessie, at the house later, but this is her position.
And she goes on to have, again, her own family, that she is someone who in a way has to moderate that family. And yes, that servants are people who moderate families. They take care of the kids, and then they make sure that the kids are off to their thing, and then they have their own families, and they function so much in family life.
Yeah, Roberta just asked in the Q&A how old Bessie might be. She seems young too. She is, isn't she? Because she has children after this, right?
Yes. So she does marry, I think it's the coachman, and has kids out. And she mentions at some point talking to her mother about Jane when Jane is still a child. So I would imagine she's in her late teens, early 20s at most.
That young. Wow. I didn't realize she might be that young, but that makes sense. So.
I would probably place her
young enough that she easily will still be having children.
She's not a miss.
Several years from now, she'll be married and have children.
Yeah. And she's not a Miss last name either. She's Bessie, which means that she probably is a younger,
let alone a Mrs., which would have made her old.
Yes.
So,
So no, I would imagine it's she's not too far removed from a child herself, taking care of the children.
Because some people that are Mrs. in the 19th century just meant you were older. It didn't necessarily mean like what we have now that you're married.
Right. Yes.
It meant older, and she's not that. But she's still Bessie.
Yeah.
Nikki has a question here. Even here in her parents' story, Jane's parents' story, do you think Jane has a concept of romantic love? None of the books she says she reads are romantic with a small r, meaning a love relationship romantic, and no one around her is in a functional relationship. So
that's true.
I think this is good enough to address now, knowing that, she will, what is it like for her as a kid thinking about romantic relationships, because Mrs. Reed's, her uncle is dead, so it's just Mrs. Reed alone, and her parents are dead.
And also from the start she has kind of been labeled unlovable purely because of her appearance, and also because of just who she is. But they say here what they will continue to say throughout the text, which is basically she's no great beauty queen here. She's a dour looking little kid. And later, when the possibilities of romance are brought forth, she does kind of, at least on the surface, dismiss them out of hand as, but I'm not attractive and neither is he, and I'm a poor governess, so it's not going to happen. So I do almost. Yeah, that's a good question, because I do kind of almost think it almost doesn't occur to her, because from the start, it is almost like she has been marked as never going to have a romance. never
And
going to be loved.
she doesn't seem to be reading stories about that either, or mentioning them right now. She's not, although this is very much a Cinderella story that someone mentioned on her thing today. They're not the stories that she seems to be reading anyway.
Yeah. She wants to go on adventures, which has its own kind of, I think, romantic, large or small R connotations to it. But she doesn't seem to be, doing the fairy tales about princes in a tower or even the old school Gothic things of heroines. I mean, she's told Pamela. She gets Henry, Earl of Moreland, which are sentimental novels, but she doesn't seem
Pamela. She's been told the story of Pamela.
True.
This is a formative story in her childhood.
Yeah, of servants who marries master and fixes master.
So that's, I mean, maybe that's the moment in her childhood that, then comes up again later in her life.
Although, again, I will say, I'm not sure Pamela is anyone's idea of a romance.
Nobody loves it.
Especially the first half, which is really just 10,000 different kinds of,
that's a novel read very differently nowadays. So it's technically a Cinderella story,
kind of,
but nobody.
But again, her story isn't a full Cinderella, a straightforward Cinderella story either. She also has to leave. And she is also in great danger throughout it. It's
far more
her Cinderella story is probably closer to Pamela than a Cinderella story.
She has far more volition and far more, she far more gets to choose in her Cinderella story than they usually do. So, excuse me, I'm fixing up another drink here.
That's fine.
This is I was telling you earlier, this is a drink called the Painted Rose. It's not necessarily tied to the novel, but this is tied to the Rosenbach because I came up with this drink for the Biblio cocktails we just had this week, and it's tied to our garden because we had a garden, Biblio cocktails. Everything in the garden is associated.
Are those roses floating in it?
They are. There are a couple little roses floating.
Oh, I love it.
So that's the garnish, little rosebuds from Italy. That's what, at least that's what it said on the bag of rosebuds that I have that are little garnishes. I mean, so. Yeah, it's called the Painted Rose from Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland, and it's gin and Lillet, rose cordial, and some lavender drops. So it's a lovely little drink.
That sounds like a glorious drink at the moment. I have tea, so
it is. So last week I had tea, so this week I'm having a cocktail. I'll put a little ice cube in there. Chapter 4. She has
she boops him in the nose.
Wait. I wanted to hit the end of the last chapter though. We get the
roasted onion.
Welsh rabbit. Welsh rabbit with the roasted onion on it. And
love Welsh rabbit. So that's like toasted cheese.
It's cheese and for people that don't know, it's just cheese on toast.
With a roasted onion. Although with the fall weather and everything, I'm up for it. That sounds kind of good right now.
I was reading last night and then I was looking, and some people call it Welsh rarebit, and the pun is that it's a Welsh rabbit, like it's like you're a poor Welsh family, so this is your idea of rabbit.
Any chance to beat up on the
cheese
Welsh.
On toast. It's a wish sandwich. But I went down and I was going to make myself one. I had a roll and I put cheese on it, put it in the oven. And then I remember we had roast beef. So I put a roast beef on it too.
So now you have an actual sandwich.
I had a sandwich. So there you go.
we are superior to the Welsh, apparently.
Hey, yes. So if you've got the roast beef in the house, eat it.
Yes.
The Chapter 4, she thinks that she's going to school now because of what Mr. Lloyd said, but days and weeks passed. And then she's kept separate from the children, and Mrs. Reed appointed her a small closet to sleep in by myself. I mean, all I could think is the cupboard under the stairs, right?
Oh yeah,
so
yes.
At this point,
she is very proto Harry Potter in this moment.
Yes. So, and John Reed is so Dursley. So he's so Dudley.
And she bops him in the nose. She punches him.
Mm-hmm.
Bless her. Bless
John,
that child.
I love this. John is trying to I'm going to show you, and she punches him right in the nose, and then he goes to his mom complaining about the mad cat, And his mom is like, I told you, don't associate
Yeah.
with her. Like her mom has even had enough now that like, I can't, she's going to punch you in the face. Then,
Yeah.
but she knows she's getting rid of her, that
Yeah.
she is going to find a school to get rid of her.
But I love how she identifies that emotion too as deep ire and desperate revolt. I mean, she really is a rebel soul who has had enough. And that's such a Jane, I think, again, thing that happens throughout the text is she'll put up with a lot. And then when she's done, she'll punch you in the face. Like she's done.
And when her mother corrects John, don't talk about her, John, nobody should associate with her. Jane leans over the banister, cried out suddenly without at all deliberating on my words. And this comes up a lot, that is, she feels like it's this involuntary, reaction that she's having. And she yells, "They are not fit to associate with me." Yes. And like, I'm cheering her like, yes. But of course that's giving her nothing but more pain. Like they are continuing to abuse her because she's fighting back. So she feels that she's in this position where I can fight back, but they're just going to punish me more.
Yeah. I think it's interesting though, that immediately following that, she demands basically, what would Uncle Reed say to you if he were alive? I'm really interested again, because you kind of mentioned this in the last episode of again, Jane as a ghost in the text. Jane is haunting her own text, but also Jane is like a vengeance figure. So many of the ghosts in earlier Gothic novels are, again, spirits of the dead, the wronged dead, coming back to seek vengeance and make sure that wrongs are righted. And Jane as a kind of a figure of the repressed returned and seeking revenge. And that's a lot of what discombobulates Mrs. Reed is that, oh yeah, there is actually this guilt. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I have let my dead husband down, and this figure is reminding me of that constantly.
And literally the whole, because Jane says, "My Uncle Reed is in heaven and can see all you do and think, and so can Papa and Mama, and they know how you shut me up all day long and how you wish me dead." I mean,
and again, Jane is
honest. That's the truth.
She is. And Jane is a Gothic author. Jane is someone who is invoking spirits of the dead because she sees an injustice. Again, it's such a great Jane as storyteller, Jane as kind of surrogate author, who's like, this is wrong, you're lying, this is unjust, and I'm going to invoke these dead spirits to,
I'm glad you're bringing that up, and Christine did last week, because that's a new idea for me in reading this kind of Jane haunting the text, and what you just said there. Jane is this kind of Gothic author of her own life. That's fascinating stuff. Bessie, I should mention, does have to give her a lecture about being the most wicked and abandoned child ever reared. I mean, this is still her job.
At this point is just almost like a who cares? She's almost taking that in her stride.
I half believed her, for I felt indeed only bad feelings surging in my breast. And it's like, what I'm feeling right now is far more serious than what you're saying. I think is what's happening there. But then a while passes, 3 months, November, December, half of January passed away, and she's excluded.
We're in no rush here, apparently.
She's excluded from everything. Bessie had been kind and companionable, she says, and she likes to spend the time with her. And then this, again, another lonely picture of her with her doll. You want to read that like halfway through the paragraph? To this crib, I always took my doll.
Yes. To this crib, I always took my doll. Human beings must love something, and in the dearth of worthier objects of affection, I contrived to find a pleasure in loving and cherishing a faded graven image, shabby as a miniature scarecrow. It puzzles me now to remember with what absurd sincerity I doted on this little toy, half fancying it alive and capable of sensation. I could not sleep unless it was folded in my nightgown, and when it lay there safe and warm, I was comparatively happy, believing it to be happy likewise. That human beings must love something is heartbreaking. But again, I do think speaks very much to Jane as a character who is in forced isolation often, and then really blossoms only when she is around other people.
Even if it's just a doll, she can love. That's what she'll do. It's not. She doesn't bury this doll, does she? What book is that? who buries their doll?
That's not Wuthering Heights, is it? Doesn't Kathy bury dolls?
Is it, or is it? Am I thinking?
Or am I just
Green
making that up because
Gables?
Kathy's awful?
There's a story where the little girl then buries her doll before she goes away. Somebody in the chat hit me with that. What am I thinking of? I don't. It's not Anna Green Gables, is it? Before she goes away, she buries her doll. She knows she'll come back to it, and I don't know. But anyway, but I was, unless it's this, and I'm just, my head's full.
I don't see. Yeah, I don't remember her burying it, but it might.
But that is, but the just her. This is the only. Well, and Bessie too. Bessie too has her.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Sorry, someone in the
Bessie
chat
too
said
has
Meet
her.
Me in St. Louis was the one where she buries the dolls.
Does she?
That's what I'm thinking of. Meet Me in St. Louis.
Maybe it is. Maybe that's what I'm thinking. So I thought it was a book that I read, and it just crushed me. Just like it was the most crushing thing that I had ever read. Anyway, when thus gentle, Bessie seemed to me Bleak House. It's in Bleak House. Esther Summerson buries her doll. That's why it's so strong.
That's it.
Dickens, who's over my shoulder here, So Dickens over my shoulder was like, Bleak House. Bleak House. I wrote that. So
how dare you put my poster up and not know this?
Oddly enough, the enormously influenced by this novel, although he never said so, and I don't think
never want to admit
anyway,
where he got this stuff from. Yeah,
Esther Summerson chapters in that novel are like he read Jane Eyre and then he wrote them, it seems, and so maybe that doll then influenced Esther Summerson having the doll. So thank you. That was who said Bleak House. That was Mary. Thank you, Mary. For remembering that for me. Bessie's kind to her now, and then she's remembering. And she's remembering Bessie here and how she's young. Slim young woman, black hair, dark eyes, very nice features, good clear complexion, capricious and hasty temper. I preferred her to anyone at Gateshead Hall, kind of setting us up for this later. I will remember her fondly, and then I will come see her again, later in the novel. But a young woman.
Yeah. But again, I think, sort of the only one who I think she regrets leaving behind at all, or misses. She doesn't seem to miss anyone else. But yeah, that again, that the servant, who is also the storyteller, is sort of the sole mother figure who she bothers to remember, is I think significant, especially for Jane emerging as this almost kind of creative figure.
Well, now we have, this is a long chapter. We really got a lot to get through. The 15th of January, about 9:00 in the morning. I mean, just by saying that, this is a momentous memory for her. She remembers the date and the time, and this is the meeting with Brocklehurst. And first she's in her room breathing on the frost flowers with which the window is fretted. I love that. And looking out at this kind of desolate landscape outside in the winter. And then she sees a little hungry robin.
I was going to say the birds make a comeback.
Yeah, more birds. And she gives it, she's got the remains of her breakfast, the bread and milk, and she's going to feed, and she feeds the robin. Another bird image in here that'll just keep piling up until we finally hit the I am no bird you can't cage, that you can cage.
No cage ensnares me.
So and then she goes down and she's called down to see him, and she walks into the room, and what she sees is a black pillar. I love this, and it's also very biblical. I can't help think of some kind of biblical image here, but it's also weird because it's black, so I think it's like some weird pagan,
with the grim face at the top, like a carved mask,
placed above the shaft by way of capital. I mean, this creepy looking tall guy dressed all in black, and it's Mr. Brocklehurst,
whose first question is not addressed to her at all, which again is such a departure from Mr. Lloyd. It's like, what's her age? Not asking her.
And he says, and then he starts questioning her, well, Jane Eyre, and are you a good child? I mean, Lloyd's not going to ask a question like that. Lloyd's
No,
going to
no.
say, ask her what she's going through and what's
Yes.
what has been
Yeah,
happening.
instead of asking personal questions, it's can you give me the subjective, objective answer to this nonsensical thing?
And Jane recognizes that's impossible to reply.
Yes.
Like, I can't say yes because everybody else says that I'm not. So I was silent. I like that. And then I love this. What a great nose. And she's looking at him. What a great nose and what a mouth and what large prominent teeth.
The way only a child can drag an adult, really.
Right. And it is, and it's so, and it's so fairy tale-ish too. It's so, what long teeth you have. And it is, he is the wolf monster ogre come to,
and someone who again cannot get over, he keeps invoking naughty child, little girl. He's definitely not, Lloyd was talking to her like a child, but also, sort of as an adult, the understanding that you can respond. Whereas Brocklehurst is like, you're a child, you're vulnerable. I'm going to take full advantage of that with my large. We're going to do
let's do this dialogue here right now. I'll do Brocklehurst. You do Jane. Ready?
Okay.
No sight so sad is where I'm going to start.
Okay.
No sight so sad as that of a naughty child, especially a naughty little girl. Do you know where the wicked go after death?
They go to hell.
And what is hell? Can you tell me that?
A pit full of fire.
And should you like to fall into that pit and to be burning there forever?
No, sir.
What must you do to avoid it?
I must keep in good health and not die. Oh, I love it. I love it.
That is so great.
Keep in good health
and it's
not
funny.
Die.
And I love because it's also a funny moment. Like, you can't help it.
And completely logical. Completely not even meant to be sass. Just being like, that.
I better not die because because in Jane's reality, she's like, well, you all say that I'm bad. And so then if that's the case, I better.
The only way to avoid that.
Because she's not in control. Because she's not in control. It's not like, hey, this is the truth. I'm not going to go to hell anyway. She recognizes that I'm not in control. And if this is if you guys are all in charge of the world and the universe, and these are the rules, then I'm going to have to go to hell. So I better not. I better not.
And I can't help but feel like it's poking fun to the whole idea of like religious election, that you can who's going and where, and she's like, well, you don't know, so I'm just going to circumvent the entire thing completely and just not die.
And the recited catechism,
was her ready and orthodox answer.
Children's religious texts are often this question and answer, and her answer is going to be, I must keep in good health and not die. So,
and his response to that, children younger than you die daily, again, it just has that real
so
grotesquely Victorian, again, paradox of we value children, but also children die all the time. And aren't they just little angels, dead angels? They're here. Just, ugh.
So yes. And then he has more questions. He asks if she likes to read the Bible. And I love this. I like, and she gives him a list. Like, I like Revelations, Book of Daniel, Genesis, Samuel.
Clearly I've read it. Yeah.
Little bit of Exodus. And some parts of Kings and Chronicles and Job and Jonah. And she
has picked the ones that are stories, are adventure stories.
These are narratives.
Yes, yeah.
They
and
tell
also
a story
too
about
that
people.
She is constantly in a sort of process of reading, like her understanding of words and definitions. Like just before that, it's he uses the word benefactress. And she's like, benefactress, if they call Miss Reed my benefactress must be a disagreeable thing. That Jane is a writer and she is also a reader. She has her own interpretations and questions and things that she's interested in generically. And it's not Psalms, as it turns out, at all.
And the Psalms, I hope you like them. No, Psalms are not interesting.
No.
Because they don't tell a story. It might be a nice poem, song kind of thing, but she wants to hear a story. And she wants to hear a story about other places, other lands that are not here.
Yeah.
And I love that she knows this is a kid that knows what she likes and what she doesn't like, and she's going to tell you.
Oh yeah. And we do see, I think too, Brocklehurst is that emerging kind of intersection between religion and economics here, which is, I knew a little boy who loves Psalms, and he gets 2 gingerbread nuts in recompense for his infant piety.
Yeah, we all hated that kid in school, right?
Oh yes, we all beat up on that kid anyway. But that it's the successful performance of infant piety gets you rewards, material rewards, and that there is. I mean, I think Brocklehurst is definitely, again, exploring that inner. I know Bronte got a lot of criticism for her depictions of clergy, but that is that very, again, interesting intersection between capitalist economics and evangelical religion, that he's a hypocrite. He's a massive just hypocrite.
It's
and
the false piety she hates,
Yes,
and that's the people she's attacking, and then she has to defend herself too. And Elizabeth Rigby, is Elizabeth Eleanor Rigby's Beatles.
I was going to say,
Elizabeth Rigby is criticizing her for, but she's but what she's really criticizing are these kind of impious preachers who are pretend pious people who are really trying to create schemes of reward and punishment within children to further society and further their own profit,
and to fit into a economic system where they're on the bottom rungs, and that his daughter goes in and is like a kid at the zoo, basically poking fun at the poor children, that this is your place and this is the economics of it, and weaponizing religion to serve an economic goal is horrifying, again, and I think beautifully understated actually in this chapter, but still very much there.
And we'll see more of that later when we get to the school that she goes to, but right now I love that she also recognizes that Mrs. Reed is sowing aversion and unkindness along my future path. Like Mrs. Reed is trying to put her in a position where it's not like she's being punished now, she's going to be punished forever because of the power that Mrs. Reed holds over her and where she can send her to do things. And
ironically picking up on the one thing that is in no way one of Jane's flaws, because she never lies. She always tells her truth, very much so to pick up on that is a devastating, I think, thing for her.
It is.
Because there is no kid who loves the truth more, and to then be marked as a liar,
and she will accuse her of that in a little bit, definitely. But
and it's beautiful.
But the description of Lowood School, boy, I want to go there. A place where you are made useful, kept humble. As for vacations, she will, with your permission, spend them always at Lowood. So this is Mrs. Reed's idea of a school. And Mr. Brocklehurst says that that the point of the school is to mortify in them the worldly sentiment of pride.
And we're having flash forwards.
Keep you in your station, right? To keep you in your station. Yes. And St. John's like the nice Brocklehurst.
But
he's still got a lot of that Brocklehurst thing.
I think in many ways, St. John is almost the Brocklehurst, but not a hypocrite. St. John's problem is that he doesn't have that sort of worldly fallback position. He's the opposite end, which is he's using the exact same language and ideas, but he's committed to it, and he's ready to drag everyone else down too with it. And it is interesting, that she starts here. Jane starts kind of facing one of these kind of men, and then ends up facing one of these kind of men, and that they're both really trying to do the same thing, which is beat her into a position where she is a tool within a hierarchy, and she can be used and useful to them.
And to help this process, Brocklehurst gives her this little pamphlet, this little book that that he and it's an account of the awful sudden death of Martha G., a naughty child addicted to falsehood and deceit. And
it's one way to get them to behave.
and these little conduct pamphlets, and this is a kind of, you know, thing that happens and in regular children's literature, these kind of stories where children do bad things and they're horrifically punished for it, but also within this religious community that is that is growing right now in the early 19th century and through it, this that is putting out these kinds of texts. Now, Mr. Brocklehurst in this novel is very much based on a real person, the Reverend William Carus Wilson, who founded the Clergy Daughters School at Cowan Bridge. Now, Wilson's a real, like, I was
gonna say, he already sounds like Walt Disney. It's amazing.
Yeah,
I bet he's a love.
He's not a terrible guy, but he is a terrible guy. Like, it's a real mixed bag when you look at Wilson. But he founds this school, which Patrick Bronte immediately sends his daughters to because he can. It's cheap and it's for his kids. He sends his daughter Mariah and Elizabeth, who are 10 and 9, and then Charlotte, who's 8, and Emily, who's 6. And they go to the school. Now, I'm going to have much more on Cowan Bridge School next week, and actually the next 3 weeks when we're at Lowood for chapters 5 through 10. But for now, I want to hit Wilson because, and then Charlotte's older sisters die because they're not cared for well, and typhoid fever hits the school. And actually, though, Mariah actually dies of tuberculosis, but they don't pay any attention to that. And then Elizabeth dies, and it's really tragic in Charlotte's life. But Wilson also did write these kind of conduct books for kids, and he wrote one called Child's First Tales, and you can find this online, and the links in the chat here, and the link will be the link is on YouTube for Child's First Tales, for one of his books that you can see in the British Library has it. And I want to share the one story in here, which is Child as a where is it? Here it is. Child in a Pet, and a pet meaning in a fury, aggravated. Yeah, so a tantrum. So, and the text for this story is, do look at that bad child. She isn't a pet. She would have her own way. Oh, how cross she looks. And oh, what a sad tale I have to tell you of her. She was in such a rage that all at once God struck her dead. She fell down on the floor and died. No time to pray, no time to call on God to save her poor soul. She left the world in the midst of her sin. And oh, where do you think she is now? I do not like to think of it, but we know that bad girls go to hell when they die, as well as bad men. I do not think this poor girl's rage is now at an end, though. She is in hell. She is in a rage within herself. She is in a rage to think of her bad deeds here on earth. My child, take care of such sins. Pray that you be meek and lowly in heart, like your dear Lord and Savior. So
exactly the kind of lesson you want every child to learn.
Man, that's
not even
horrific.
Really a lesson. It's just and then she died.
And she died, and she's in hell.
And she's in hell.
And she's always going to be in a rage forever because of this rage she was in life, because kids don't ever get in rages. And adults never get, like, well, of course we do, but
yeah,
she died, and so she didn't get to ask forgiveness, and so that's where she wound up. And this is the kind of book that, and notice too that it's all one syllable words. So this is directed exactly for a child to read and understand. That's the kind of person that's the bad side of William Carus Wilson, that he was doing this. So there's also the good side is that, like, there was actually that they learned really great subjects that were really important, and especially girls didn't get to usually learn and that kind of stuff. But he didn't run his school well, and clearly he had this horrific
underlying
Calvinist,
hatred of children, as it turns out.
Hell, hell and damnation way to teach kids. So, and that's the kind of book that Brocklehurst gives to Jane, and Jane is, what does she say about it? Does she even? He puts it in her hand.
I'm not sure she even.
She doesn't. She doesn't even comment.
It.
Like, I'm certain she doesn't even read it. Like, I'm not going to read this.
No.
I'm not going to read this crap. What are you giving me here?
I don't even want to read Psalms. What makes you think I want to read this?
I'm certainly not going to read this. She is, continually banished. She's sent to her room. Oh, right away though. This time she's sent to her room. Go out of the room. Return to the nursery. And I love this passage. Speak, I must. I had been trodden on severely and must turn, but how? Speak, I must would have been like, that was like my runner-up for title for this episode. Jane is this is the time in her life. She's coming to grips with this. Like, I have to start speaking out.
Yeah. I feel like even as readers, you're just like, say something. We're so frustrated at this point by the Reeds family and every other injustice that's been inflicted on this kid that we're like, we'll kill her ourselves if we don't get some kind of, release from this. For sure.
We did have a couple questions here that I didn't hit. Someone says, an eye devoid of Ruth. That's what Brocklehurst has, right? Or is that Mrs. Reed?
Devoid of Ruth.
That is, I should have searched Ruth, not I. I devoid of Ruth. That is Mrs.
Ruthless.
Reed. Yeah, and that's definitely, a devoid of Ruth means, yes, that is what it means. It means ruthless. Someone says, one can only imagine the kind of sexual abuse going on in those schools, considering what we've learned about Catholic schools and secular boarding schools in the U.S. from Liliana. Yeah, and I want to do schools when we get to them, because we're not in the school yet. No one until the very end of the novel is allowed any kind of redemption, are they? Not even the children in the books is anyone redeemed. Not true. In these books, there are actually, in this story that I shared, like that's like one of the really bad stories. And then it's also interspersed with all kinds of stories where the children are really good and they, are happily ever after and they get rich and all that. And the Joel Osteen kind of, philosophy to,
I'd also say
you'll be rich.
Too, I'm not sure that the Reed family. It was interesting rereading this because obviously when Mrs. Reed is dying, Jane goes back and she stays with the family and she sort of gets to know Eliza and Georgiana a little bit better. And I'm not going to say that they're redeemed because they're not, but they are also given, I think, a depth and a little bit more complexity. So I think it's not, are these characters redeemed? It's that Bronte really very rarely has two-dimensional characters. And I think that's one of the great things about this book. I mean, there are exceptions, but even characters who drive me crazy, even St. John, he's a mess, but you get where he's coming from. Like, you understand. I think one of the great strengths of Bronte as an author is that she really doesn't put people into these good, bad categories and keeps them there. And they aren't, it isn't a redemption arc. It's just that they're people and they're messed up. And, they have these complexities to them. And Jane's real problem with St. John is just that they just don't gel together. Like they're just going at the same thing from different angles. And
we don't want to really talk about St. John now. We've got
sorry, jumping ahead. But just again, in terms of, are there redemption for these characters in the book before the very end? I would say yes, there are. And it's less about redemption and more about
well, Kathleen, I hope you're going to come back. You're going to come back in the spring, aren't you? Please?
I'm very excited. I'm here.
We'll get you some late chapters too to talk about this.
Just
we're a little over, and we want to finish this chapter. But I love what she says to Aunt Reed here. Now, earlier she has accused her, and she is like, like God and the dead people in her life are watching you. And now she's really giving it to her and telling her about, I don't lie, your own kids lie.
Yes.
I'm glad you are no relation of mine. I will never call you Anne again. The thought of you makes me sick.
Yeah. And she also, again, doesn't invoke her dead parents or Mr. Reed. This is entirely from her.
Yeah.
This is her feelings.
Now it's about Jane. And
yes,
she
now
says
it's
that
all about Jane.
Aunt Reed says, how dare you affirm that? And she says, how dare I?
How dare I?
How dare I? Because it is the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
You can't handle the truth. And you put me in the red room and you made me suffer and you all lied. People think you're good. And Mrs. Reed is shaken.
Yeah. And again, Jane is an excellent
not just by the truth.
storyteller.
Yeah, yes. but I like, she says, like, are you okay? Like, I can imagine this 10-year-old kid coming at her looks like she's about to.
That's a pet. She's in a pet her. Now.
Yeah. And she is going to attack her.
Yes.
And Mrs. Reed is completely frightened. And Jane's, deceit is not my fault. I cried out in a savage high voice.
Yes.
That I need to be heard here. No one's, you're not ever listening to me. And I'm trying to tell the truth here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and even more, people think you are a good woman, but you are bad, hard-hearted.
Yeah.
The kind of underlying threat through all of this that, she's going to tell people the truth.
Which is always the great threat for these like pretend pious people.
Yes.
That they will be found out.
And I think even later she tries to silence her again, and it's like, no, I will tell the truth. You can't make me stop. Branding me a liar will not make me stop telling the truth. But I do think I think it's exposure that Reed fears as much as anything, and that does
she has a real moment now, though, that like, I was left there alone, winner of the field. It was the hardest battle I had fought, the first victory I'd gained. I had stood a while on the rug where Mr. Brocklehurst had stood, and I enjoyed my conqueror's solitude. But then what did I win? I was in a sense, she says, I accused and menaced Mrs. Reed, the madness of my contest, the conduct, the dreariness of my hating position. Like, she's recognizing that, oh my God, I just became you guys.
Yes.
Like, I hate
and she can't even go and apologize.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because she knows that it was just a way to make her repulse me with double scorn. Yeah. She needs to get out of here.
She needs to get off to this school. But that moment too, where, I know it's the narrator coming back on this thing ahead, but it's the moment like that she realizes at this moment in her life that like, the vengeance I can't carry with me.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too,
that will pollute me, she says, in a sense.
If she does have a fault within, kind of the time and place that she is, it probably would be identified as passion. Jane is extraordinarily passionate. And that's often marked as a negative for women in particular, in sentimental fiction and Gothic fiction. Of the overly passionate people are always the ones who get themselves into trouble. But again, I don't think especially for contemporary readers, I don't think her passion is marked as a bad thing. But it is something that she learns to manage over the course of the book. And if there's a flaw or if there's something that she needs to adjust to, it's the passion.
Which is the difference between readers in that day and reading in ours. And I think, and Charlotte Bronte recognizes it, her characters recognize it, that I actually need to dial back a little, and I need to control myself. And I mean, I read this book and I'm like, and I tell my daughters, like, like, speak the truth, yell it out. And especially very contemporarily, when we realize that, like, how long are we going to be told that things will change? For whatever group or for women especially. And it's about time to say enough. Like, I'm going to keep on this until, I see real change, instead of being promised that, well, things have been getting better for the, so I think we do read this text differently. And I'm okay with Jane
standing up and like, shit, go, you go.
I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
She tries to read Arabian Nights or Arabian Tales of Genie, whatever it's going to be, and she can't. She can't find the solace in that in a book that's taking her to far off lands, because she's not she can no longer find the solace that she had when she was a younger child. She has not changed, and she is going to have to, books are going to be different for her now.
And she has also changed in her assertiveness, because Bessie comes in and tries to scold her again, and Jane's not having it anymore.
And I love it that but she doesn't lay in the Bessie. She's like, "Come, Bessie, don't scold," and she hugs her. And it's like she's found this other way of, at least with the servant. She's not really with Aunt Reed, but to hug her and
talking to her as an equal.
And this is where Bessie says, "You're a strange child, Miss."
Yes. And also that you should be bolder, which I thought was interesting, because she was a Hellcat not 2 chapters before.
Like, why is that's exactly what gets her in trouble.
Yeah.
And Bessie's saying that to her, and then I love Jane's response, what, to get more knocks?
Yeah.
Like, when I'm bold, people, attack me and defend themselves, because technically Jane is doing all the attacking.
True. She's no one else is punching her in the nose. She's punching John.
Ever since the book was thrown, now it's all Jane.
Yeah.
Like, now I'm coming at you.
And also too, you should be bolder, and you're going to get the knocks, but that's just going to keep happening throughout the book. So you got to sort of learn to roll with the punches a little bit here.
And this moment with her and Bessie, and she says, I don't think I shall ever be afraid of you again. I have got used to you, and shall soon have another set of people to dread. This kind of funny way of looking at it, that and then Bessie says, "I don't dislike you, miss. I believe I am fonder of you than of all the others. You don't show it." And then, Bessie is like, "Well, you've got a new way of talking." And,
this is you. This is the real you. And I kind of prefer that to the you from before.
So it ends.
Yeah, that's it too. Yeah, that you were always such a queer, frightened, shy little thing. Maybe now she's Jane. I'm the Jane with the involuntary cry and this is who I am. You have to get used to now. Why don't you read that last paragraph to take us out? I'll
kiss you.
I'll kiss you and welcome. Bend your head down. Bessie stooped.
That Jane says. I love that.
Yes.
She's taking the control. She's in control. She's the adult here.
Yes. I'll give you. Yeah. Bessie stooped. We mutually embraced, and I followed her into the house quite comforted. That afternoon lapsed in peace and harmony, and in the evening, Bessie told me some of her most enchanting stories and sang to me some of her sweetest songs. Even for me, life had its gleams of sunshine. So and again, that we leave on the thing that she and Bessie really share, which are stories.
Yeah.
And storytelling.
And Bessie has found a way to accept Jane for who she is.
Yeah.
And recognize that that's not the kind of child that is supposed to be in the family. But
different kind of kid.
They have an accord here.
Yes, we have reached an accord. Only for Jane to leave.
Yes, and now she's leaving. Like, it's so brief. So that will be off to Lowood School. Well, all of my erudite Brontosaurs and airheads, thank you all for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website, and you can watch it on YouTube. If that's how you're watching, thanks for watching. We have a Sundays with Jane Eyre Facebook group too, where we continue the conversation. Look us up on Facebook and join in that conversation. It's a lot of fun. But also you can go to the Rosenbach's YouTube account and like the Jane Eyre videos and subscribe to the channel and leave comments. That'll give us greater visibility and grow the audience. I want to thank my chat, Mrs. Fairfax today, Brianna, for managing the links in the chat today. Next week, my co-host will be the return of the Ghoul Guides. We all love them. Dr. Lauren Nixon and Mary Going, who you know well, and I'm very happy to have on here once a month. We'll be covering chapters 5 and 6 of the novel, When Our Strange Child Goes to the Lowood School and meets Helen Burns. So that'll be very wonderful to have those chapters. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have, including our gallery gateways and exhibitions. And the Rosenbach is also open to visit. See our website for how we're making it safe for you to come see our exhibitions and historic house in person. And sometimes we even have programs there. Like I had a cocktail party the other night with this painted rose cocktail, which was delicious. And please support the Rosenbach, which you can do by donation. We're asking for donations of $18.47 or $184.70 or $1,847
Keep adding the zeros.
There you go, to support the show. But any donation is welcome. And if you're not already a member, I invite you to join. Kathleen, thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me. I had a great time.
Good. I love having you, and I hope you can come back then. So
me too. Me too. I would love to do that.
Good. We'll talk about dates. I've only scheduled the dates through December, and then we'll,
that's ages away.
Put together next year. We'll have you on next year. I'd have you on
Wonderful.
More than once too. You're really wonderful at this.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. This was great.
Thank you for joining us in elucidating this novel.
Oh, yes.
Playing us out over the credits, everyone, will be the Pleated Gazelle song Secrets. And let me get ready to go with that. Farewell, readers. May you live entirely for and with what you love best on earth.